Okay, YouTube, Todd here again, some guitar guy. First off, and as always, thanks for watching. So, another video, another general aviation crash video. This is actually down in St. Augustine, I believe. But the reason it's of interest to me, first of all, it's a Cessna 150. That's what I trained in, learned to fly in, not this plane, but mainly because it departed Greenville, downtown GMU, just 30 minutes or so to my to the east. And this happened, I just found out about it this morning. Facebook group, Aviation 24/7, I believe. They do a pretty good job covering when there's information to cover. There's a little bit more than what they, at least the local news is reporting. That's unverified, and quite honestly, I tend to question the news more. I do question the news a lot more than I do social media. Um, but this happened Friday, about a 3-hour flight from GMU down to North Florida Regional, and the pilot almost made it, about a mile, maybe less than a mile from the airport. And this is US 1 to the left. That's a train track to the right. And we see some deformation here to the left wingtip and wing. Definitely a prop strike. No flaps deployed. And then the next picture, and notice how quickly the sky has changed. There's actually a video I'll get to, and I'll leave the links in the description, where they are trying to remove this plane, and it's raining, and you see how just kind of back and forth. I mean, that's a different direction. I guess that's should be facing south, and then back to the north. But some definite damage to both wingtips, of course, these power lines everywhere, and I would say, initially thought a prop strike, but then one of the this, I think it's actually the same news source, reports the engine lost power. So maybe the owner kind of lucked out there. So this is another picture from the Facebook group. You see kind of making this S from being out along the coast, traveling south, US 1 and the A1A, and then probably a better picture. So that was the destination airport, and yeah, I'd say less than a mile from the end of the runway. Don't know when the engine trouble started. If it were before we got to the A1A, I'm not sure why we would try to stretch getting over to the airport and just put down out here somewhere, or here. I think there were maybe better choices, but we'll kind of get to that and think maybe there were some better choices to be made long before this. So let us go to the kind of my web page. This is kind of my process. First thing is, well, what plane is it? Who owns it? We see it's a 150F, registered to, and this is public information, by the way, registered to Mr. Penn out of upstate New York. Okay, so I did a airman search on that name, and looks like a family of pilots, which is impressive. A commercial, holds a commercial certificate and instrument rating, but we do see basic med from back in 23, so no longer flying commercially, and that really makes sense too. It's another kind of go-to site, the Aviation Safety Network. I'll leave this link in the description also. Not a lot of information here, just an emergency landing next to southbound lane of US one about 1,800 meters northwest from the runway. It's a very concise and not a lot's known. They do provide the METAR and then this link. We'll see if it'll work now. Nope. You should be able to open it, but when I reloaded it, now I can't read it without a subscription. But a nice little video that in that video they didn't report, I don't think they said anything about, I mean obviously it's an emergency landing, but this was a student pilot. So that kind of got me. And the first thing, first question is, well, can a Cessna 150, does it have the fuel range to make this flight? And let's take a look at it on FlightAware. And you gotta love the ads. But this is about a 300 nautical mile flight, and we see the flight path kind of meanders a little bit. So that's tells me the pilot's probably hand flying the plane. But does the Cessna have that range? Well, yeah, I would say it does. Even if the pilot didn't lean, just the recent flight history for the plane from back June the 29th, there's a 3 hour and 22 minute flight going on up. There's a 3 hour 24 minute flight, and then a 3 hour 45 minute flight, which I believe, this was the news also reports not only was this a student pilot, but a student pilot that purchased the plane. So it's starting its southbound trek, I guess, probably here from Westchester to Royalton, 3:45 on this flight on Saturday, then another 30 minutes, not sure why, maybe there was not fuel available or something here, and then Monday, July the 7th, 2 hours 15 minutes from Roanoke down to GMU. But then curiously, the plane sits, apparently, or at least there's no ADS-B data from the 7th to the 11th when it takes off and also that's another kind of questionable thing. It takes off, it departs at, where's the time? 11:56 a.m. So we're in the South, it's July, and thunderstorms are like daily, especially when you get out here to the coast where you have this giant weather engine called the ocean. And I guess this is an image from that day. So you take off and fly during the heat of the day. You're a student pilot, and maybe the student trained in a 150 and has time in it, but there's this gap between the 7th and 11th that I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not what happened. I would like to think the person got some flight time in this airplane, even if they trained in a 150. Because airplanes, they're a little like cars, same make and model, but little nuances. At least some pattern work, if not, actually going out and maybe not across country, but, getting it up to cruise altitude, trimming it out, getting familiar with the controls and the avionics and all that stuff, and then taking off. So, and then you're probably seeing this too. This jumped out. Here's the altitude and here's the airspeed. So yeah, this tells me the person's almost certainly hand flying the plane, which is good and impressive. But why this big spike here and in altitude up to 8,000 feet at peak. And then this super long, about 100, probably over 100-mile descent for the destination airport. And just let me zoom in a little bit on this flight path. You see these dog legs. So the first one, and we'll look at it on the chart here, but this is Daniel Field in Augusta Regional. And I see the reason for the dog leg. They're trying to stay out of busy airspace, at least I thought. But then once we move southward as the flight progresses, we make another dog leg, and that's actually going toward Savannah, to Savannah. You can zoom in a little bit, and the pilot almost flies over midfield. Now, and that's where the climb starts before they get to the Savannah airport. And they fly over the top of the Class Charlie airspace. And I'm like, well, why would you do that? You're burning a lot more fuel. And then as soon as you get clear of it, you basically go into 100+ mile cruise descent. And the only thing I can think is, well, Savannah is a cool town, so maybe to overfly the field, get a sightseeing, and then flying down the coast and gonna get on down. We do stay clear of Jacksonville airspace, but then we have this S into the final, and for whatever reason lose power. So I don't think this is going to be a fuel issue. I don't know that I would have taken this this particular flight path, especially in the heat of the day. It would be cool to fly over the ocean and get some pictures or whatnot. But you're also talking a student pilot here. So that was my next question, and I actually had to look it up. Can a student pilot legally make this flight? And it turns out the answer is yes. I mean, in training, you do have to make solo cross countries. But I think those require landings at different airports. So even though this has the distance, I'm not sure it would really qualify. It would really count as the long solo cross country. The student can make it. The caveat is it must be endorsed in the logbook by a CFI. And these ads are really annoying. I apologize for that. But so, yeah, assuming this is what happened, the student found a plane they wanted to buy. Maybe it's getting its annual or the pre-buy inspection or something at GMU. Why it is on the ground for for the whole week preceding this flight. And it is entirely possible the student did some lapse in the pattern and ADSB didn't pick it up. So kind of trying to look at things in the best light for the student. Now, if I'm the CFI, and I'm not, and that's entirely subjective, basically, but I don't know that I endorse this flight to begin with. I don't know that I endorse, especially the part here where we go over the top of Class Charlie airspace, yet we bypass a TSRA in Augusta. I would, if I were the pilot, the student or the CFI, I would definitely insist on flight following. And maybe that is the case. Maybe this was flight following and they were directed to go over the top of Savannah. That's also a possibility. but I think I would have probably picked a less busy route. And let's kind of take a look here. This is with my flight planner through the AOPA. So it's about 300 nautical miles, 322 ETE. And that I think is with current winds. I can't really dial back to see previous weather, but that's just direct, straight line. And where does that take us? And why wouldn't we want to fly this way? So we're taking off GSP. Well, that is going to take us through not only Augusta's TSRA, but also into Class Delta airspace here. So I don't know that I maybe would have done that. Definitely with flight following, or maybe would have done like this pilot did and kind of dog leg around and stay a little clear, but still with flight following. But along this area, and maybe they picked up this Victor Airway and started tracking the VOR, but along about here, the student turns and overflies Savannah, which is Class Charlie. Now, certainly a beautiful city. A lot of reasons, I guess, to explore that area. And assuming the pilot is from somewhere in Florida, they're not going to be shy talking on the radio and talking to controllers, because there's so much air traffic down there and so many towered fields. But the direct route keeps us clear of Savannah. It does take us that's Jekyll. Let's see, it actually keeps us clear of Jacksonville airspace also, but there's other controlled fields, including the destination airport. But direct just seems to be, it's not only shorter, it eliminates this long, about a 5,000 foot climb, and then about a 5,000 foot prolonged descent, which I don't know. So initially my question was fuel, and that doesn't seem to be the case with this with the 150. I think it's capable of that. I don't know that it was the smartest thing to do. We don't know how far down in Florida the student was headed. I think I would have stopped short somewhere and picked up fuel and entered Florida busy airspace with plenty of fuel. So let's look at a couple of other if we fly VOR direct and take a look, well, we pick up, it's what, 10 nautical miles further, and it actually would kind of take us, it would take us over Savannah, but not out over the water. So that would be a pretty good route to fly. And it would keep us clear of Augusta. And there are lots of fuel stops potentially, either after we clear Savannah or, before we kind of start really getting down into including the VOR here at Jekyll. Now, I don't know, a student pilot may not want to land at Jekyll. That's fairly relatively short, but St. Simon's, and then the other option would be low altitude airways, and I think I like it better. It does, I think this took me over Augusta, where am I? No, Athens. Okay, so it keeps me out of Augusta airspace. Do pick up a good bit of mileage here flying these low altitude airways, and 344 probably starting to push that fuel envelope, but we go right near all these airports in South Georgia, which any of would have been potential fuel stops. I probably would have picked Baxley because you could basically see it from the air, and topped off the tanks and then continued on and could have stayed well west of at least Jacksonville. You may not miss them all going down, depending on where you're going, I guess, in Florida, which we don't know. But back to the path we took, or the pilot took. I don't know that I would have endorsed that flight as a CFI, not taking that flight path, not with the student, and don't know the student's time in a 150. But yeah, that big spike. And I think what if it's not fuel, what caused the engine to quit? Well, it could have been a number of things, but what jumps out to me is this long descent, and I think that's probably what got him with this high humidity. Even with high heat, carb ice can and will happen, and I think that's probably what got the pilot. Why no one thought of that before taking this flight, and maybe the student didn't fly the route that the CFI recommended or agreed on. But I think this long descent, I mean, that would have been about an hour or so. Probably carb ice, and the engine lost power. Probably still had fuel. The thing is, and I'll finish up on this page, with no injuries and no on the ground or from anyone in the airplane. And that's another thing too, that's maybe a little iffy, taking a long, so you could count it as solo time, but I don't think you can count it as cross country, because there were no other landings, unless this one is going to be one of them. But with no injuries, it doesn't look like the NTSB will pick this one up, so we probably won't know the end result. So I'll just kind of finish with this, and that's really as good of any. But I mean, it turned out as well, I think, as it possibly could. All things considered, a student pilot with unknown time in a 150 flying solo at least 300 nautical miles. Looks like they did a pretty good job until the end. And by the way, I think I mentioned this when they're moving this plane in that video, it is actually raining, so that high humidity probably needed carb heat. And no mention, and maybe carb heat was activated, but I don't know. I mean, I think better flight planning, and if it was a fuel exhaustion question, they were less than a mile from the field. Yeah, I think that long extended climb, really for no reason, would have definitely played a part. But I don't know. I'm very conservative when flight planning and flying and all that. So sad, and especially this is the person's brand new plane, and I don't know, from what we can tell, from what ADSB data, this was the first landing. So anyway, I'll keep an eye out. I don't know that there'll be probably no follow-up stories to this, or NTSB reports, but something to think about. I'll close it out now. If you guys have, please let me hear your thoughts in the comments. Remember to do the YouTube thing, and until next time, thanks guys.